Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that you all know that keeps a watch on Donald Trump and reports back to you every week with a commentary and analysis of what's been going on during the previous week. So, of course, the big news was President Trump's big, beautiful bill, massive, out-of-control federal spending and debt. It continues that trend. It's absolutely shocking to me. I mean, all I ever hear from Republicans is how fiscally responsible they are. And that when they're out of power, they're saying, oh, big spending Democrats, big debt-producing Democrats, put us in power because we know how to handle things in terms of balanced budgets and fiscal responsibility. In fact, don't you remember it's not too long ago where they were all crowing about a balanced budget amendment, And of course, now we see that this is all a sham. And I've said it's a sham for decades. There's no difference between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to out-of-control federal spending and debt. They're both on the same page, and we can see this now in President Trump's big, beautiful bill. In fact, it's shocking that they raised the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. I mean, might as well just abolish it. The federal debt is now at $37 trillion. That's about, I think, around $320,000 per taxpayer. Okay, nobody puts it on their balance sheet when they go to the bank, but that's each taxpayer's share of this debt. And of course, everybody just puts it aside and says, oh, well, I don't need to worry about that. That's tomorrow. That debt's got to be paid off. And it's either going to be paid off by taxing people or it's going to be paid off by printing the money. That's what the whole purpose of the Federal Reserve is. That's why the Fed was established. And that's what they've done for decade after decade after decade. They just print the money to liquidate that debt, and that's why we've had a constant debasement in the value of the dollar for decades. I mean, if you look at the value of the dollar, it's just a downward trend. And that's because of the Fed paying off this massive out-of-control debt. But it's a tax. You know, inflation, people define inflation sometimes as rising prices. That's not what inflation is. Inflation is the inflation of the money supply, the expansion of the money supply. And the way it's reflected in terms of debasement in the value of the currency is higher prices in terms of everything that the dollar buys. It's the only way that a devaluation, a debasement of the currency, of the value of the currency can be reflected. And is higher prices in terms of everything that money buys. And we've seen that over and over again for, all of our lives, really. And we're going to see it again. President Trump, as everybody knows, is putting pressure on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. He thinks that this is a good way to artificially stimulate the economy. We've gone through this for decades, this debasement of the currency. That's all that the Federal Reserve is intent on doing. And that's what they will end up doing. And this pressure to lower interest rates is just part of this same decade after decade monetary phenomenon. It was a huge mistake to convert to a paper money system. It also just boggles the mind that was what Franklin Roosevelt did as part of his New Deal in the 1930s. The gold coin, silver coin standard had been established by the Constitution. It's well recognized that once you have something established by the Constitution, the only way that you can change that particular system is through a constitutional amendment. He didn't do that. He just nationalized gold. Just like they do in communist or socialist countries, like when they nationalize petroleum, Pemex in Mexico. It's the same thing what Roosevelt did. He just made it illegal to own gold for Americans. They were required on pain of a federal criminal prosecution to turn in all their gold coins, which had been the official money under the Constitution for more than 100 years. Turn it in, you're going to get paper money in return. And of course, the paper money promised to pay gold. You can still see that in the term Federal Reserve note on a dollar bill. But it's a note that promises to pay nothing. And they just keep printing more and more of it, and that's why we've had this downward trend in the value of the dollar. And now that the debt ceiling is being raised by $5 trillion, I mean, the debt ceiling was the perfect opportunity for Trump and the Republicans to essentially balance the budget, because all they had to do is say, no, we've got this ceiling. Now, of course, the mainstream press would have been saying default, about how the government's got to default if they don't raise the debt ceiling. They bring this up every single time, and then as soon as the debt ceiling is raised, they go back to normal. They don't say, hey, we better start reining in federal spending for the next time the debt ceiling is reached. No, they start laughing. They go out and have champagne and everything to celebrate that they did it again. They scared the American people into raising the debt ceiling. And so Trump could have just enforced the debt ceiling and said, no, not going to do it this time, which would have meant no new borrowing. Okay, now it's not the libertarian ideal. It doesn't necessarily get programs abolished or whatever, but it does bring federal spending down to the level of where it's pay as you go, no more new borrowing. And instead, the big beautiful bill raises the debt ceiling to $5 trillion. I mean, you add that $5 trillion onto 37, there's $42 trillion. But I would assume it's going to take a while to reach this new debt ceiling, which is what they wanted, so they don't have to deal with it. But we're talking about massive out of control federal spending, and as I've said for a long time, this cannot end well. It's going to end very badly. It's just impossible to predict when it's going to end, but it's going to end at some point. I mean, we see examples like Greece and Italy, and where they just go broke. They don't have enough money to service the debt, plus all the welfare payments and the military payments and so forth. They're just bankrupt now. They'll get somebody to bail them out, like the the International Monetary Fund or the U.S. government, directly or indirectly. But there's going to be nobody here to bail out the U.S. Now, my hunch is that what Trump is doing by trying to pressure Powell out of the Federal Reserve as chairman is that he's preparing a scapegoat just in case things go really south. That if things go really bad, especially in combination with all his tariffs that are now being revitalized, that he can say, oh, well, the problem is not my system, not this whole out-of-control federal spending and debt and tariffs and trade wars and sanctions, embargoes, and so forth. The problem is Powell. That Powell should have left and that we should have lowered the interest rates, and that's the reason we're having this huge economic crisis. So I think he's just setting the groundwork to have a scapegoat. In addition to illegal immigrants, I mean, they're the standard scapegoat. I think if things go south, he's going to say, oh, it's because all those illegal immigrants were in over here getting jobs and producing wealth and sending remittances down to Mexico. That was the real cause of this crisis. But make no mistake about it. The crisis, if it comes, the fiscal crisis, the economic crisis, will be because of out-of-control federal spending and debt. The interest on the debt now exceeds the amount of money they're paying the military, and you know how much that is. I mean, that's now, Trump wants to favor them with over $1 trillion. I mean, this is just ridiculous. But it never stops. There is absolutely no threat of any invasion, occupation, attack on the United States by any nation state. Everybody's broker than the U.S. government is. And nobody's got the military capability. Russia, China, Iran, whoever. They don't have the military capability to cross the ocean with the troops and the ships and the planes necessary to invade the United States, much less occupy the United States, take over the United States. And yet we have this massive military establishment, over $1 trillion, that are really making things worse for the American people. And I've long argued this, that as long as you have a national security state, you are not safe. You're not safe from the government. I mean, this is what our founding fathers understood perfectly, that the federal government is the greatest threat to our freedom and well-being. This is what people forget, because the national security state inculcates them with a fear of all these foreign enemies, the terrorists, the Muslims, the drug dealers, the Iranians, the Russians, the communists, the Chinese. They're all out there. So everybody gets scared. And it's ironic. We live under this powerful, powerful military, and the most powerful military intelligence establishment in history, and Americans are the most frightened people in the world. I mean, it's just crazy. But that's the system, and so they need scapegoats, and part of those scapegoats are of course illegal immigrants, and I think part of it also is going to be the Federal Reserve in case things go bad. So Trump is now, revitalizing his tariff campaign. This is a system where Congress has permitted him to just willy-nilly set tariffs, which are taxes on the American people. They're sales taxes. That's all they are. And he has the authority to raise taxes, impose taxes on the American people to any extent he wants. And he is. And he's just willy-nilly saying, oh, well, here's a tax here and there's a tax there. And one of the fascinating aspects of this is Vietnam. It's just so ironic because here the Vietnamese, had a communist regime, defeated the U.S. national security establishment in Vietnam militarily, united the whole country under communist control. And now they're the ones that are advocating for free trade. I mean, go figure. And it's the U.S. government that's advocating controls on economic activity. I mean, it's just weird. So Trump enters into a deal with them. Really fascinating situation where they don't have any tariffs on U.S. goods. And they were willing, at the very onset of Trump's tariff trade war nonsense, they were saying, we will agree right now to no tariffs. You don't put any tariffs on us, we don't put any tariffs on you. Okay? So from the standpoint of an American free trader, that's fantastic. Okay, that's like the ideal. No trade restrictions between the two countries. Well, Trump was not willing to settle for that, and you see he wants a positive trade surplus. So the Vietnamese agreed to a situation where the U.S. has a 20% tariff on the importation of Vietnam goods, and they have a 0% tariff on the importation of American goods. So from Trump's standpoint, he won. He won the trade war against Vietnam. But the Vietnamese are smart enough to realize that they are better off not having these tariffs on their own people. Again, they're sales taxes. And so they're saying, well, we're not going to respond by putting sales taxes on our people just because you're putting sales taxes on the American people. And they're smart in doing that. That's the best position a country can ever take, is just to say, no, we're not going to have trade restrictions. If you do over there to your citizenry, well, that's your business. And that's their business. You guys need to work that out. But we're not going to over here put trade restrictions and tariffs or imposition of higher taxes on our citizenry in response. So it's really ironic that the communists are taking that position and the U.S. government is taking the opposite position. So let's see. Well, we got the bombing of Iran, of course. And as I've often pointed out, we have pointed out the Future of Freedom Foundation for umpteen years. Foreign interventionism, which of course is the foreign policy of the United States, has been all of our lives, actually makes us more safe. Now they create this sense that, oh, they're keeping us safe, but it's just a gigantic racket to keep the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, the three components of the national security establishment, which is the most powerful branch of the federal government. It really controls foreign policy. It essentially controls the whole federal government, but especially foreign policy. They make things more unsafe for the American people, not only in terms of out-of-control federal and spending and debt, which we've already talked about. They are a principal component of the looming bankruptcy of the United States, because they're not letting go of their largesse any more than any welfare state recipients are letting go of their largesse, much less the ICE and the immigration officials and Border Patrol and the DEA and their Homeland Security. They're not letting go of their largesse either. So all of these entities are contributing to the bankruptcy. But the thing about foreign interventionism is it makes Americans unsafe. In fact, Attorney General Pam Bondi said that the Justice Department was on high alert because of a group of Iranian nationals who had entered the country during the Biden administration. So what she's talking about is the threat of terrorist attacks here on American soil. So now we're supposed to get all excited and nervous and scared over terrorism on American soil because of what they did in Iran. You see, that they create the conditions that they then use to inculcate fear, and then a police state here in the United States, a national security police state, to keep us safe. And of course, that's what the 9/11 attacks were all about. After those attacks, they said, oh, they just hate us because our freedom and values. That's the only thing. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that we were killing multitudes of people in Iraq with our sanctions, or the unconditional support we were giving the Israeli government, or U.S. troops in Islamic Holy Lands. Oh, no, that's all irrelevant, they said. It's just they hate us for our freedom and values. Well, of course, it was the exact opposite. They create the conditions with foreign interventionism and foreign alliances and foreign aid and so forth that then take away our liberties here at home. That's how we got the Patriot Act and the telecom spying and so forth. And so now we're looking at it again. The threat of a terrorist attack because of really a war of aggression. This was an unprovoked attack on a sovereign, independent country. No declaration of war from Congress. Totally illegal, totally unconstitutional. But it's like, oh, well, that such is life. The president now has the authority to wage war and declare war. We'll just ignore that part of the Constitution. Doesn't count. And then here's another article from the Wall Street Journal that U.S. tourists are now having to deal with animosity from people overseas when they visit foreign countries. That there's this built up animosity toward the American people, because what a lot of foreigners do is what a lot of Americans do. They conflate America, the nation, with the federal government. And actually, we're talking about two separate entities, the nation and the federal government. I mean, that's reflected by the Bill of Rights, which protects the nation from the federal government. But a lot of people just conflate the two and say, oh, it's we, and they use that pronoun we. We need to go and bomb Iran. And what they mean by that is the U.S. government needs to go bomb Iran. But it's the American nation, the American people, that then go to travel in Europe, and there's a lot of animosity. And so this article was saying this is, a phenomenon, and this is how you might deal with it, and as a tourist overseas. But this is what they do to us, as compared to a foreign policy that we had when our nation got established of non-interventionism, where the world loved Americans. Everybody loved Americans, Well, they loved their money too, but Americans were traveling all over the world in the late 1800s. People loved them. There was no passports. I mean, there was just a sense of freedom of travel. The government has no more business controlling where you go than it does, determining what you do with your money. And so there were no passport controls. You just went. You didn't need to report to anybody. You could take whatever money you wanted, $10,000. You didn't need to report it. As compared to today with the war on drugs and all this nonsensical money laundering laws and financial reporting laws, of course, none of which has done anything to win the war on drugs. They're just forever programs that keep federal judges, federal prosecutors, DEA agents, Homeland Security all in high cotton with their very well-funded, generous federal tax-supported salaries. Not to mention the fact that a lot of them are on bribes, too. Of course, that's the drug war corruption. But it's just an example of how this policy of foreign interventionism not only affects us adversely in a fiscal manner, financial matter, monetary, economic, but also makes us unsafe in terms of terrorist attacks and mistreatment overseas, and not to mention the fact that the police state that comes into existence to ostensibly protect us from all these threats. I mean, look how miserable it is to go to the airport now with the TSA. I mean, I just read that they're eliminating their take off the shoes requirement. I mean, those of us that are old enough remember how pleasant it was to fly, where you didn't have to be searched and subject to humiliating and abusive and insulting treatment by little dictocrats. I mean, these little TSA agents, they're like little dictocrats. They know they'll never be a big dictator. Okay, very few people can become a dictator on a bit massive scope, but jobs like that permit them to be little dictators, and they thrive off it. And if anybody looks at them the wrong way or says something bad, boy, they'll call over all the other TSA agents, and it's a serious offense if you talk back to them. They will charge you with something. I forget what the offense is called, but fine you. I mean, they're little dictocrats. But that's what foreign interventionism does. There's a huge cost to this foreign aid to the Israeli government and to all governments. We need to just terminate all federal aid, foreign aid. It's just a crooked, corrupt system, and then get rid of all the sanctions and the embargoes and the trade wars and the tariffs and all this, and just restore a society where people have economic liberty, where they're free to interact with the people of the world. If you want to go to Cuba, you go to Cuba. You don't need to worry about getting prosecuted when you get home. And of course, that then raises the concept of open borders that you all know that I've long advocated. I mean, it's just, to me, amazing that an American can go to, let's say, Cancun, and when he comes back, be subjected to a complete search. I mean, why do you give up your rights just because you've gone to Cancun for a couple of days? Your right of privacy, a right to be left alone. It's just incredible to me. They have the authority to do searches of you when you come back. They can require you to turn over your cell phone and your password, and if you don't, they'll confiscate it, and they'll get into it anyway. But they'll arrest you, they'll detain you. I mean, it's like, why? How? Under what authority? Well, you left the country. So what? You lose your rights because you've left the country for a couple of days to go on vacation? It boggles my mind but we're all accustomed to it. So it's like boiling the frog. How do you boil a frog? Well, you don't just throw a frog into the hot water and he'll jump out. So you just put him in the cool water, and then you just turn up the heat. And that's what they do with Americans. So Americans come back from a couple of days in Cancun or wherever, and they don't care. Oh, Jacob, it's no big deal. I'm being asked for my papers, and in an extreme case, they might ask me to bend over and do a cavity search or whatever. But I'm sitting there saying, why? Under what authority? But that's the whole concept of liberty, that people, they trade their liberty for security. Got to be protected by the terrorists, by the illegals, Jacob, And of course, it's an interesting phenomenon, reading about all this, that Trump is justifying his roundups and his raids and all this of illegal immigrants, saying, oh, they're criminals. So I read, and I put in ChatGPT of, how many criminals are released from penitentiaries across the country every year. And I forget a number. I think it was like about 1 million or so. And I forget what the average was each month, but it's really high. But nobody loses any sleep on this, okay? There's all these criminals are being released from state penitentiaries and federal penitentiaries every day, or maybe every week or every month. Lots of them, but no, in every state. But nobody loses any sleep. Nobody's saying, oh my gosh, they're being released from prison, Jacob. What are we going to do? We got to throw them out of the country. We've got to exile them. We got to put them on an island in the Pacific, all these criminals. No. You pay your price, and then you're released. And some of them go and commit crimes again. We all know that. They return to the penitentiary system. But that's our system, you see, and everybody's just accustomed to it. Nobody loses any sleep over the fact that all these criminals are being released from prison, but all of a sudden, oh my gosh, Jacob, but they're a foreign criminal. Oh my gosh. Really, how's that any different? But that's that fear that the government inculcates in people, that foreign criminals are more dangerous than domestic criminals. It's just pure nonsense. In fact, I often think that one of the best things could ever happen in this country is for Americans to conquer their fears. If Americans could just conquer their fears, we could get rid of a lot of this stuff. The whole welfare state. Why do we have a welfare state? Because people are fearful that without the welfare state, people will be dying in the streets. You hear that with Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. Oh, if there wasn't these programs, people be dying in the streets. And so people are deathly afraid of that. But if you could overcome your fears, or if people could overcome their fears, that's not the way it works in a free society. In a free society, everybody's fine. Everybody's better off. Voluntary charity skyrockets and so forth. I mean, that's why I love the late 1800s so much, is that there was none of this welfare statism, no income tax, IRS, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, paper money, Federal Reserve, DEA, Homeland Security, minimal immigration controls. I mean, it was just, I think, the most remarkable society that's ever existed. Now, was it perfect? Of course not. The statists were making inroads. They had the Sherman Antitrust Act. They had Jim Crow that was coming in. They had the Spanish-American War in there. But if you eliminate the exceptions, I mean, they set the foundation for really a fantastic society. And unfortunately, the 20s and the 30s come along, and new generations of Americans say, no, we're going to reject that way of life. All right, so then we also, let's see what else is going on. Tax on remittances. This is really disgraceful. I mean, you got immigrants that are coming here to better their lives, the poorest people you'd ever find. And they a lot of them leave their families behind. They come up here, they work seasonally or for a period of time, and they send money back to their families, like in Mexico. Huge amounts of money. I mean, this is the type of thing that you would think would be encouraged. This is family values, pure family values. They could be spending the money out here and, booze or whatever. They're saving the money. They're paying taxes, because if they're working for an employer, there's withholding and income tax and FICA and all that stuff. But they're still able to save some money with the amount of money they make, which is, relatively speaking, not an enormous amount of money here in the United States, but they still are able to save a part of it and send it back home to their parents or their wife or their children. And my gosh, this is something that we should be extolling. This is raising people out of poverty, helping them get out of poverty. I mean, isn't that what we often hear, is that if Mexico would just get their situation correct, that there'd be less immigration? So these remittances provide tremendous prosperity on an overall basis, from family to family to family. And now they're going to tax these remittances. I mean, talk about taking from the poor to help the rich. I mean, it's just the appearance is just horrendous of doing something like that. Like I say, this is something that we should be praising. We should be saying this is fantastic. But we got it. More taxes. You see, more taxes. So let's see. I think that's probably pretty much it. There was an article about the sanctions that the U.S. put on some Mexican banks, and the Mexican government got upset because the U.S. government was accusing these banks of laundering money, and the Mexican government got upset because the U.S. officials would provide no evidence. And the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, says, well, let us see your evidence. Well, it has caused tremendous damage for these banks, because people think, oh my gosh, they're going to be under sanctions. I need to withdraw my money. And you know how that goes. Just the mere fact of an accusation like that has caused tremendous damage. So in any event, that's Trump Watch for this week. That gives you a report of what's going on. So I'll wrap it up there, and thank you all for tuning in. Thanks again for your great support of the Future of Freedom Foundation. We're very honored and appreciative. Obviously, we couldn't do our work without those of you that support us, and I just can't tell you how grateful we are and how honored we are for your continued support. Thank you for tuning in. I look forward to seeing y'all next week.